testimony in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin continues for its second week today. The fired Minneapolis police officer is charged in the death of George Floyd. Today, Minneapolis Police Chief Medaria Arradondo took the stand. He is the one who fired Chauvin after the incident. He answered many questions about his experience with the police department. Earlier today, the emergency room doctor who tried to save Floyd's life also took the stand. Dr. Bradford Langenfeld testified that Floyd's heart had stopped and he tried to resuscitate him. He stated what he believed was the cause of the death.
Was your leading theory then for the cause of Mr. Floyd's cardiac arrest oxygen deficiency?
That was one of the more likely possibilities. I felt that at the time, based on the information I had, it was more likely than the other possibilities.
And doctor, is there another name for death by oxygen deficiency?
Asphyxia is a commonly understood term.
Thank you, Dr. Lang.
Okay, for more on this, I want to bring in Gloria Browne-Marshall. She's a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the author of She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law, and Power. Gloria, thank you so much for joining us. The Minneapolis police chief is testifying in this trial today. How significant is it to see a police chief testifying against an officer? That's pretty abnormal, right?
It is unheard of. I think probably in the history of these cases, and the history is short because there's so few cases that are brought by prosecutors against police officers, and then to have the chief actually fire the officer and then testify against him is unheard of until now.
Until now, and we're waiting for the trial to resume. Of course, they've taken a quick lunch break. Now, the first witness we saw today was the doctor who pronounced George Floyd dead. I want you to walk me through the strategy behind this witness and how the defense will counter, because we heard that testimony that he pointed to a lack of oxygen as the likely cause of death, which bolsters the prosecution's case, correct?
Well, yes, because there has to be a substantial factor. The whole time we have the second degree and third degree murder and, of course, the manslaughter, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was the action of Derek Chauvin that led to the death directly, to George Floyd. And so bringing the doctor on to say that he died of asphyxia is saying, well, he died of lack of oxygen, where the defense counsel wants to counter and say it was the drugs in his system and he would have died anyway, perhaps, but it wasn't the substantial causal factor, which is what the prosecution has to prove, that knee on the neck was a substantial causal factor in the death. And so that is what they're battling over right now, the actual way in which George Floyd died and whether that knee on the neck was that substantial causal factor.
And obviously another point is, the observing of the actions of Chauvin, right? And whether or not he responded correctly. Earlier this morning, the judge ruled officers may give opinions on Chauvin's actions. How could you see that impacting the case?
Well, this is going to open up a whole other reign to this that I don't know. It's kind of interesting, because if they're making officers quasi-expert witnesses, because this is the job they do day to day, that means that the other part that was brought into with the policy on de-escalation that was brought into this means that an officer is supposed to consider, when reasonable, de-escalation tactics. So that could then be very subjective depending on the officer and their encounter. That's what allows officers to get away with so much on the one hand, but it's necessary in their job because it's very subjective. And is even stated whether or not the subject is having a crisis in their life, a behavioral crisis or a drug crisis. So each officer is going to respond in different ways because each of us has a different technique we fall back on when we're dealing with a particular situation. So I think it's highly unusual to allow an officer just to give opinions, but it's also up to the jury to decide how much credibility will be given to those opinions.
And we saw the police chief, Arradondo, going bit by bit through the training manual, correct, when it came to those de-escalation tactics. As we move forward in the case, what are you going to be watching for as this trial continues this week?
We're going to continue to watch for the defense counsel's ability to just add little cracks where there is a reasonable doubt and try to extend those cracks into something large enough for them to actually get a jury to believe that Chauvin did what he did based on some thought he had in his mind. And that is where the police officers being able to testify could work for or against, the defense. Look at it this way. If a police officer says, well, in that situation, here are all the ways in which Chauvin still feared for his life. He feared for the crowd coming up. He feared that because George Floyd was a large man, that he might jump up at any moment and get off the pavement and hurt them in some way, even though handcuffed and prone. But that need to put that reasonable doubt in the minds of jurors is something that we're all going to be looking for with every single witness. The defense counsel has that burden, even though the burden of reasonable doubt is on the prosecutor, the burden to give that sense that there was some fear, that it was based on the health of George Floyd. That is how this is going to ping pong back and forth, and each witness is going to be one in which that defense counsel is going to have to make that wedge larger and larger in order for Derek Chauvin to be acquitted.
And with each witness, more fuel to this national dialogue that we are having about being black, the black experience in the United States. Professor, I also want to turn the corner here and talk about a new play that you have out called Dreams of Emmett Till. Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Well, we witnessed what happened in Central Park with so-called Central Park Karen, but we also need to know that this killing of black people, whether by police or by white vigilantes or white people who believe they can do so with impunity, Emmett Till's murder in 1955 represents that impunity, represents these two white men who kidnapped Emmett Till, 14-year-old black boy in Money, Mississippi, brutally murdered him, threw his body in the Tallahatchie River, and Carolyn Bryant, who said that this little boy accosted her in a store in this small town. So here we are years later, and every time someone is in the situation of George Floyd, we have to think back of that 14-year-old boy. And so I wrote this play because I can't see justice in the real world. I had to, as a playwright, create justice in a world in which Emmett Till confronts an elder Carolyn Bryant, asking her again, why did you do this? And even with these police officers, George Floyd could ask, why did you do this? And I think it's in this country, in this democracy, over 1,000 people die at the hands of police. And there are many more who are unnamed, who die at the hands of white vigilantes. What are we to do? How are we to reconcile a democracy with such heinous behavior? So my play, Dreams of Emmett Till, is April 8th, Thursday, and it's free and open to the public to start these conversations. That's necessary for us to go forward as a nation. We've got to talk about this. We can't just let it disappear, because as we know from 1955, the death of Emmett Till has not disappeared. It's only gained momentum. It is a critical conversation that we need to continue to have again and again and again. And it's, your play obviously touches on that and is an important body of work. Thank you so much, Professor. We appreciate your time. Thank you.